My name is Clara, I'm 30 years old, and at my own sister's wedding, my entire family demanded I sign over my home to her, and when I refused, she slapped me across the face in front of 300 people. Before I tell you how a single text message from the groom's father, a legendary lawyer, started the chain of events that would cost them everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you for being here, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please, let me know what city you're watching from. It means a lot to know I'm not just speaking into a void. The sound is what I remember first. A crack that wasn't loud, but sharp, like a dry twig snapping in a silent forest. It echoed in the sudden, dead quiet of the grand ballroom. For a split second, everything froze. The band, the waiters, the clinking of champagne glasses, it all just stopped. A hot, stinging bloom of pain spread across my cheek. My head had snapped to the side from the force of it. I slowly turned back to face my sister, Sophie. Her face, framed by the perfect tendrils of her wedding updo, was a mask of cold fury. There wasn't a hint of regret in her eyes, just a triumphant glint that said, I won. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother give a tight little nod, as if to say, finally. My father just looked down at his polished shoes, suddenly fascinated by them. And then, the worst part. A little ripple of laughter, starting from her bridesmaids' table, then spreading. A few of the guests, people who had known me my whole life, were smiling. They were entertained. I stood there, the print of her hand burning on my skin, and I felt utterly, completely alone. But that slap, it wasn't the beginning. It was the end. The real story, the one that led to that humiliating moment, started 3 weeks earlier, on a quiet Tuesday morning in Chicago. My life in Chicago was my fortress. I'd built it myself, brick by brick. After law school, after passing the bar, after years of working 60-hour weeks, I finally bought my dream home, a historic brownstone in Lincoln Park. It wasn't just a house, it was proof. Proof that I could make it on my own, without anyone's help. It had 3 bedrooms, exposed brick walls, and a little garden in the back where I'd sit with my morning coffee. It was my sanctuary. It was mine. That morning, the mail arrived, and among the bills and junk mail was a single, heavy envelope. It was made of thick, cream-colored cardstock, and my name was written across the front in a swirling gold calligraphy that dripped with money I knew my sister hadn't earned. My stomach tightened. I knew what it was before I even opened it. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Sophie Elizabeth Miller and Ethan Hayes. Sophie. My younger sister. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, our lives were a study in contrasts. Sophie could crash a car, and my parents would worry about the scratch on the bumper. I could win a statewide scholarship, and they'd tell me not to get a big head. She was the light, the joy, the one everyone adored. I was the fixer, the planner, the responsible one who was always expected to clean up the messes. I hadn't spoken to Sophie in nearly 2 years, not since she'd borrowed a significant amount of money from me for a business idea that turned out to be a luxury vacation to Bali. We didn't have a fight. She just stopped answering my calls after the money was gone. I tossed the invitation onto my marble countertop, next to a stack of case files for a major promotion I was working towards. I decided right then and there I wasn't going. I didn't owe them my presence. I had a career to focus on, a life I had built 1,000 miles away from their suffocating world. But 2 days later, my mother called. Clara, sweetheart, her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she wanted something. Did you get the invitation? I did, Mom, I said, keeping my voice flat. Well, we haven't received your RSVP. I'm in the middle of a huge case right now. I don't think I can make it. The sweetness in her voice vanished, replaced by a familiar, sharp edge of disappointment. Don't be ridiculous, Clara. This is your sister's wedding. It's the most important day of her life. We're all hoping you'll make the effort. The effort? I almost laughed. I've been making the effort my whole life. She's your sister, she said, as if those 3 words could erase decades of favoritism and neglect. Family comes first. You need to be here. The conversation ended the way it always did, with me giving in. A part of me, a small, foolish part, still hoped that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me. See the woman I'd become. So I booked the flight. I reserved the rental car. I told my firm I needed the weekend for a family wedding. I packed my best suits, my sharpest heels, and a carefully constructed wall around my heart. As the plane descended into Charleston, the air outside the window grew thick and hazy. When the cabin door opened, the humidity hit me like a wet wool blanket, clinging and heavy. It was the smell of home, a place I had run from for so long. I picked up my rental and drove through the familiar, oak-lined streets. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt alien. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I saw my mother standing on the porch, waiting. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest, her posture rigid. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed felt heavy, thick with things unsaid for years. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, my hand hesitating on the door handle. I took one deep breath, preparing myself for the performance I knew I'd have to give. I stepped out of the car into the suffocating Georgia heat, and before I could even say hello, my mother's eyes narrowed. She took a step forward and said the one thing I never expected to hear. "We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind," my mother said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "Hello, Mom," I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle, like it might crack my face. The flight was delayed. She just nodded, her eyes raking over my tailored travel suit, my leather briefcase. It was the same look she'd always given me, a silent appraisal that always found me lacking. "Well, you're here now. Your father's in his study. Sophie is out with her friends for some last-minute bridal nonsense." She turned and walked back into the house without offering to help with my bags. I stood there for a moment, the heavy, floral-scented air pressing in on me. This was a mistake. My gut screamed it, a tight, cold knot forming right below my ribs. But I had come this far. I squared my shoulders, picked up my suitcase, and followed her inside. The house looked like a magazine spread for a southern wedding. There were white roses in crystal vases on every surface. A giant, professionally shot engagement photo of Sophie and her fiancé, Ethan, hung in the foyer. Sophie was laughing, head thrown back, a perfect picture of carefree joy. Ethan stood beside her, looking smug and polished in a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. Nothing about them looked real. "I'll show you to your room," my mother said, leading me down the familiar hallway. But she walked right past the door to my old bedroom. "Mom, my room is back there," I said, pointing. She stopped and turned, an annoyed little sigh escaping her lips. "Don't be silly, Clara. We needed that space for wedding storage. You can't imagine the amount of things this event requires." She said event like she was talking about a royal coronation. "You'll be in the guest room." I dropped my bag and pushed open the door to my old room. She wasn't exaggerating. It was a storage unit. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, filled with ribbons, party favors, and tulle. My old desk, the one where I'd studied for the LSATs until 2 in the morning, was buried under a mountain of gift bags. The posters I'd had on my walls were gone. My bookshelf was empty. It was as if I had never lived there at all. A cold feeling washed over me. This wasn't just practical, it was a statement. I had been erased. "Sophie needed the space," my mother repeated from the doorway, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You've been gone a long time." That night at dinner, the chill in the air was palpable. My father barely looked up from his phone, only grunting a housework, before getting absorbed in a sports alert. Before I could even answer, my mother asked if I was dating anyone, the same question she'd asked every time we'd spoken for the last 5 years, conveniently forgetting the painful breakup I'd told her about last Christmas. I was pushing green beans around my plate when I started hearing them. Whispers. My Aunt Carol and a cousin were in the kitchen, their voices low but carrying. Can you believe she even hesitated to come? After everything they've done for her. I heard from Sophie that Clara promised them the house months ago, as a wedding gift. Now she's backing out. So selfish. Always had to be the center of attention, that one. Thinks her big city lawyer job makes her better than everyone. My blood ran cold. A promise? I had never promised anyone anything. Sophie was lying. She hadn't just neglected our relationship, she had been actively poisoning it behind my back. She was setting a stage, and I was being cast as the villain in a play I didn't even know was happening. It was a calculated, deliberate campaign to isolate me. Sophie herself swept in halfway through the meal, glowing and giddy from her bachelorette party. She was wearing a silk dress that looked like it had been poured onto her body, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. Clara, she squealed, kissing the air next to my cheek. The scent of champagne and expensive perfume enveloped me. Look at you. Still rocking that serious lawyer vibe, I see. It's good to see you, Sophie, I said, my voice tight. She flopped into the chair beside me, grabbing my father's wineglass and taking a long swallow. I was so worried you wouldn't come. You know, big city life and all. It must be so hard to come back to all us simple folk. I met her gaze. Her eyes, which everyone always described as sparkling, looked hard and calculating. The simple folk seem to be doing just fine, I said quietly. She just smiled, a sweet, saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, I'm glad you're here. It means the world to Mom and Dad. The unspoken part hung in the air, it doesn't mean a thing to me. The next evening, they came for me. I was in the cramped guest room, trying to review a contract on my laptop, when there was a soft knock on the door. I opened it to find my mother, my father, and Sophie standing there, arranged like a firing squad. They all wore the same tight, polite smiles. Can we have a word, Clara? My father asked. His voice had the falsely cheerful tone he used when he was about to ask for a big favor. It's almost 10 o'clock, I said, glancing at my watch. This won't take long, my mother assured me, already brushing past me into the room. We all gathered in the formal living room, the one with the furniture no one was ever allowed to sit on. The air was thick with a tense, expectant energy. They sat on the pristine sofa opposite me, a united front. Clara, my father began, clearing his throat. You know we are all incredibly proud of you. That big promotion at your law firm, all your success, it's truly remarkable. I felt my guard go up instantly. No one in my family ever led with a compliment unless they were about to deliver a blow. You've done so well for yourself, my mother chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. That beautiful brownstone in Chicago, you bought it all by yourself. It's a real testament to your hard work. I said nothing. I just waited. But it is a very large house for one person, she continued, her eyes fixed on me. 3 whole bedrooms. It's more space than you could possibly need, don't you think? I earned that space, I said, my voice low and steady. Of course you did, dear, no one is denying that, she said quickly. But your sister. Sophie and Ethan are starting a new life together. They want to start a family right away. A home like yours would be the perfect place for them to raise their children. Sophie beamed, placing a hand on her perfectly flat stomach. We want to have them close together. It would be a dream to bring our babies home to a real house, not some tiny starter apartment. My blood began to pound in my ears. I could see where this was going, and the sheer audacity of it left me breathless. A starter home in a city like Chicago is completely out of their reach, my father added, his tone now taking on a lecture-like quality. The market is impossible for young couples. But you're established. You could easily downsize. Find a nice condo closer to your office. It would be more practical for a single woman, anyway. There it was. A single woman. The final, dismissive judgment. My success didn't matter. My hard work didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that my life didn't fit their traditional mold, and was therefore disposable. Sophie leaned forward, her face a perfect mask of sweet reason. We're not asking you to be homeless, Clara. We're asking you to give us a hand up. A real inheritance, you could call it. You've always been the strong one, the capable one. This is something only you can do for us. I stared at them, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. They had planned this. Every word was rehearsed. They had brought me here, not to celebrate a wedding, but to execute a heist. They wanted to steal my home. My sanctuary. The physical embodiment of every sacrifice I had ever made. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You want me to sign over the deed to my house? A property worth over $1 million. You want me to just give it to you? It would be the right thing to do, my dad said firmly. For family. You don't even have a family of your own to fill it, Sophie added, her voice laced with a sickly sweet pity. It's just sitting there, empty. That was it. That was the line. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need some air. Don't be so dramatic, my mother snapped, her polite facade finally cracking. We're just asking you to help your sister. No, I said, turning to face them, my entire body trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. You're asking me to erase myself. You're asking me to hand over the only thing I have ever built for myself, so your favorite child can play house in it. I walked out. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came the next day. I was on a conference call with my firm in Chicago, discussing the final details of the case I was supposed to be leading to get my promotion. My colleague sounded strange, hesitant. Clara, is everything okay? She asked. Yes, of course. Why? There was a pause. Well, your father called Mr. Davenport this morning. Our managing partner. The phone felt heavy in my hand. He what? He said you were having a family emergency, that you were under extreme emotional distress and that you were unstable. He suggested you be taken off the Henderson case until you were in a better state of mind. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was a direct attack on my livelihood. My career. My father, the man who was supposed to protect me, had tried to destroy my professional reputation to blackmail me into giving up my home. He had taken a knife and stabbed me in the back, right where he knew it would hurt the most. That was the moment I knew. There was nothing left to save. There was no family here. There were only enemies. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment with a 1, and let me continue my story. The wedding day arrived under a blistering South Carolina sun. The venue was an old plantation estate, dripping with Spanish moss and the kind of historical grandeur that costs a fortune to rent. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The flowers were flawless, the string quartet played without a single missed note, the champagne was chilled to the exact degree. It was a beautiful, elaborate, and completely hollow performance. I spent the day moving like a ghost through the festivities. I wore a navy blue silk dress, elegant and understated. I smiled at relatives who looked right through me, their minds already poisoned by Sophie's lies. I watched Sophie float through the day like a queen, her designer gown trailing behind her, accepting compliments and adoration as if it were her birthright. Her groom, Ethan, stood beside her, a handsome accessory, blissfully unaware of the rot festering just beneath the surface of his new family. I told myself I just had to survive it. Get through the ceremony, make a brief appearance at the reception, and then I could escape back to my life, back to my sanctuary in Chicago. I would leave this whole toxic mess behind me and never look back. I had my resignation from the family written in my head. The ceremony was held in a garden under a massive, ancient oak tree. As Sophie and Ethan exchanged their vows, my mother caught my eye from across the aisle. She wasn't looking at her youngest daughter getting married. She was looking at me, her expression hard and expectant. It was a look that said, "This is your last chance." My blood ran cold. This wasn't over. They were planning one final push. At the reception, the grand ballroom was a sea of white linens and crystal chandeliers. I found a small table in the corner, nursing a glass of wine, trying to become invisible. But of course, they wouldn't allow that. My father appeared first. He sat down heavily beside me, his tuxedo stretching tight across his stomach. "Clara," he said, his voice low. "Your mother is very upset." "Is she?" I replied, not looking at him. "You're making a scene by not participating." "I'm sitting quietly at a table." "I believe that's the opposite of making a scene." "Don't play games," he hissed. "You know what this is about. You are being selfish and you are ruining your sister's special day with your attitude." Then my mother arrived, her smile as sharp as a shard of glass. Sophie was with her, her veil now removed, her makeup still perfect. They formed a tight circle around my small table, cornering me. "We have been more than patient with you, Clara," my mother said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You're really going to do this?" Sophie asked, her voice filled with a theatrical disbelief. "Today of all days? You're going to choose a building over your own family?" "It's not a building, Sophie," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but I willed it to be strong. "It's my home. The home I bought with the salary I earned at the job my own father tried to sabotage yesterday." My father flinched, but my mother's eyes narrowed into slits. "You will not speak to your father that way," she snapped. "He was only trying to make you see reason." "This is my final offer," Sophie said, leaning in, her voice dropping. "You sign the house over, and we can forget all of this. We can go back to being a family. If you don't, I will make it my mission to tell every single person I know what a cold, heartless person you are. I will ruin you." I looked at their three faces, united against me, their expressions a mixture of greed, entitlement, and righteous fury. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Not in a way that made me weak, but in a way that set me free. The last, stubborn thread of hope that I could ever earn their love finally snapped. I stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound. I looked directly at Sophie. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the space between us. "The answer is no. It will always be no. If you want a house like mine, I suggest you go to law school, work for 10 years, and buy one yourself." I saw the flicker of disbelief in her eyes, then it was replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. "You've always been jealous of me," she spat, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "Because no matter how much money you make or how many promotions you get, you're empty. You have nothing but your job. You will always, always be alone." And then it happened. Her movement was a blur. One moment she was standing there, the next her hand was swinging through the air. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that cut through the music. My head snapped to the side, and a hot, searing pain exploded across my cheek. The world seemed to slow down. The string quartet faltered. A dozen forks froze halfway to their owners' mouths. For one long, deafening second, there was absolute silence. My cheek was on fire, my eyes watering from the shock of it. I slowly, deliberately, turned my head back to face her. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at her, my expression completely blank. And then, the second, more painful blow landed. A laugh. It started at the table with her bridesmaids, a high-pitched, drunken giggle. Then another person joined in. And another. A soft wave of amusement rippled through our corner of the room. I heard someone whisper, "Well, she had it coming." Another said, "Someone finally put her in her place." They were laughing. They were celebrating my humiliation. I looked from Sophie's triumphant face, to my mother's smug nod, to my father's cowardly refusal to meet my eyes. I looked at the smiling faces of the guests. In that moment, I realized I wasn't at a wedding. I was at my own execution. And they thought they had one. They thought I would crumble, that I would run out of the room in tears, defeated. But they didn't know me. Not anymore. The laughter died down into whispers, and the band, after a moment of confused silence, started playing again, a little too loudly. The show was over, as far as they were concerned. My family started to turn away, a little nod of victory, assuming I would just dissolve into the shadows. But I didn't move. I stood there for a moment, the sting on my cheek a grounding force. It was a strange sensation. The pain was real, but beneath it, a feeling I hadn't expected was rising up, not sadness, but a cold, crystalline clarity. It was like a fever had broken. For 30 years, I had been trying to win an unwinnable game. And now, I finally understood. The only way to win was not to play. I turned, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, and walked not towards the exit, but straight to the open bar at the far end of the ballroom. I moved with a purpose they had never seen before. I could feel their eyes on my back, confused. The bartender, a young man with wide, startled eyes, looked like he wasn't sure if he should be calling security. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice even. "A glass of your best champagne, please." He hesitated for a second, then poured. As he handed me the flute, I pulled my small clutch purse from my shoulder. My hands weren't shaking. They were perfectly steady. I took out my phone. The screen lit up, and I saw I already had a few texts from concerned friends back in Chicago who I'd told I was going to the wedding. I ignored them. I had work to do. I opened a group chat. It was a private, encrypted chat called Legal Eagles. It consisted of 5 other women. We had all graduated from law school together, all fought our way up in a world that wasn't always welcoming. There was Maya, now a top-tier journalist in D.C., Jess, a bulldog of a litigator in New York, and Hannah, a tech wizard who ran her own digital forensics company. We weren't just friends. We were a private army. They knew my family's history. They knew every struggle, every small victory. My fingers flew across the screen. I kept it simple, factual. Like the first draft of a legal complaint. At Sophie's wedding reception. Publicly slapped by her after I refused to sign over my house. Parents supported her. At least 50 guests saw it. Several laughed. I hit send. Then, I remembered something. One of Sophie's bridesmaids, the one who had laughed the loudest, had her phone up, recording. A quick search on Instagram confirmed it. The video was already there. A 10-second clip, posted to her stories. The angle was perfect. You could see Sophie's face contorted in rage, my head snapping back, the shock on the faces of the people in the background, followed by the smirks. The caption read, "My girl Sophie finally putting her bougie sister in her place. LOL. I downloaded the clip before she could think to delete it. I sent it to the Legal Eagles chat. The 3 little dots appeared almost instantly. Maya was first. Downloading the video. Sending it to my editor. "Do you want to be named or remain anonymous?" I typed back. "Name me. I'm not hiding." Jess was next. Assault and battery. Public humiliation. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Do you want me to file a police report from here, or do you want to do it locally? Hannah's message came a second later. I've archived the video from her story, along with a list of every account that has liked or shared it so far. Her digital footprint for the night is now preserved. Tell me what you need. A small smile touched my lips. I took a sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue. Across the room, I saw my family huddled together, shooting me nervous glances. They had expected tears. They had expected a retreat. They had no idea how to handle a counterattack. Then my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was from a man I'd been briefly introduced earlier in the day. A quiet, distinguished man with intelligent eyes. Ethan's father. He was a retired, but legendary, corporate lawyer from Atlanta. A man whose name still carried immense weight in legal circles across the country. The message had only 3 words. I am appalled. I saved the message. That was it. That was the crack in their fortress. He was a witness. A credible, powerful witness. This was no longer just a messy family drama. It was now a documented assault with a witness of impeccable character. I watched as a change began to ripple through the room. A few guests were now looking at their own phones, their smiles fading, replaced by looks of shock and discomfort. The story was spreading. Maya's editor had clearly moved fast. A well-known legal blogger with 500,000 followers had already reposted the video with the caption, "This is what happens when a successful woman says no to her entitled family." This isn't a family squabble. This is assault. The laughter had stopped. The whispers now had a different tone. People were looking at my family not with amusement, but with dawning horror. They were no longer guests at a party. They were bystanders at a crime scene. The next 48 hours were a blur of digital wildfire. Wedding slap, as the internet quickly dubbed it, was trending on Twitter. The video was everywhere, on TikTok, on Facebook, on news aggregators. My story, which for so long had been my private burden, was now public domain, and the court of public opinion was delivering a swift and brutal verdict. The first casualty was Sophie. The boutique PR firm where she worked as an influencer liaison released a statement Monday morning. We do not condone violence or harassment of any kind. Sophie Miller is no longer an employee of this firm, effective immediately. Her career, which was built entirely on image and social connections, was incinerated overnight. Next was Ethan. His tech startup, which was in the middle of a crucial round of funding, suddenly hit a wall. An article in a major tech journal came out with the headline, "Character questions swirl around founder after viral wedding video." 2 of his key angel investors, one of them a prominent advocate for women in tech, publicly pulled their funding, citing concerns about the values and judgment of the company's leadership. The company he had built was now radioactive. And then there was the call from my mother. It came on Tuesday. I was back in Chicago, sitting in my quiet, peaceful brownstone, when her name flashed on my screen. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. There was no greeting. Her voice was ice. "Are you happy now?" she spat. "You've ruined your sister's life. You've humiliated this entire family in front of the whole world." I stayed silent for a beat, letting her words hang in the air. "I didn't post the video, Mom," I said calmly. "Sophie's friend did. I didn't slap anyone. Sophie did. You are not the victims here. You took a private family matter and you made it a public spectacle," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Your sister is getting death threats. People are calling our house. This is all your fault." "Is she sorry she hit me?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "She's sorry this has all been blown out of proportion," she finally said. And that was all I needed to hear. No remorse. No apology. Just anger that they had been caught. "I have nothing more to say to you," I said, and I hung up the phone. My hand was steady. I felt no guilt. I felt nothing. The emotional hold they'd had on me for 3 decades was finally broken. The fallout continued to spread. My parents, who prided themselves on their standing in the Charleston community, found themselves suddenly isolated. Friends stopped returning their calls. Their invitations to the local country club's events mysteriously stopped coming. The perfect world they had built, founded on image and appearances, was crumbling because the truth had finally come out. The most surreal moment came a week after the wedding. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I was working late, and the intercom in my lobby buzzed. I frowned, annoyed. When I pressed the button for the video feed, my heart stopped. It was Sophie. She was standing on the rain-slicked sidewalk outside my building. She was still wearing parts of her wedding attire. The silk skirt of her gown was tattered and stained with city grime, her hair a tangled mess. Her makeup was streaked down her face in black rivers. She looked like a ghost, a wreck of the radiant bride she had been just days before. She looked up at the camera, her eyes wide and desperate. I could see her mouth forming one word: please. I just stood there, my hand frozen over the button to open the door. I watched her on the small, grainy screen. This was the performance of a lifetime. The broken, penitent sister begging for forgiveness. For a split second, a flicker of the old, conditioned guilt pricked at me. But then I remembered the triumphant look in her eyes after she slapped me. I remembered the sound of the crowd laughing. I remembered the cold, calculated cruelty in her voice when she threatened to ruin me. This wasn't repentance. This was desperation. She wasn't here for forgiveness. She was here because her world had fallen apart and she thought I, the family fixer, would put it back together for her. I watched as she slumped against the wall of my building, sobbing into her hands. And I did the hardest and kindest thing I have ever done for myself. I took my finger off the intercom button and I walked away from the screen. You would think that after the public humiliation, the loss of her job, and the implosion of her new husband's career, my sister would have simply disappeared. You would be wrong. 2 months later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my office. Inside was a lawsuit. Sophie was suing me. For defamation, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and, I had to read this part twice, for breach of an implied familial promise regarding housing. She was claiming I had destroyed her reputation and that I owed her financial damages for the emotional trauma and the loss of the home I had promised her. My family's final act wasn't one of apology, but of breathtaking, audacious greed. I didn't get angry. I got a lawyer. Well, I called my lawyer, Jess, from my Legal Eagles group chat. When I read her the complaint over the phone, there was a long silence, and then she let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "The entitlement is almost impressive. Okay. Let's burn it to the ground." We didn't just defend. We countersued. For frivolous litigation, for attempted coercion, and for assault and battery. Our filing was a masterpiece of legal precision. Exhibit A was the unedited, high-definition video of the slap. Exhibit B was a sworn affidavit from the groom's father, Ethan's father, detailing the confrontation he witnessed. Exhibit C was a collection of the threatening text messages Sophie had sent me prior to the wedding. And the crown jewel, Exhibit D, was a deposition from my own firm's managing partner, Mr. Davenport, detailing the phone call he received from my father. In it, he testified that my father had attempted to professionally sabotage me by fabricating claims about my mental stability, a clear attempt at blackmail and coercion. The media, which had started to move on, pounced on the story with renewed vigor. This was no longer just a viral video. It was a full-blown legal war. The court date arrived on a crisp autumn day. I walked up the steps of the courthouse in Chicago, flanked by Jess. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. I said nothing. My statement would be made inside. The courtroom was packed. I saw my family sitting on the other side of the aisle. Sophie was dressed in a drab, ill-fitting beige suit, her hair pulled back severely, an obvious attempt to look like a victim. My parents sat behind her, looking haggard and old. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Ethan was not there. I later learned he had filed for divorce the week before. The proceedings were swift. Sophie's lawyer was completely outmatched. He tried to paint me as a vindictive, wealthy older sister who used her power and social media to destroy her innocent, bright-eyed sibling. Jess dismantled him. Innocence does not involve a documented history of financial manipulation, she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom as she presented evidence of Sophie's past loans. Innocence does not involve a coordinated campaign of slander, she continued, referencing the affidavits from wedding guests who'd heard the rumors Sophie had spread. And innocence most certainly does not involve physical assault, in public, on camera. When they brought up the emotional distress the viral video caused, Jess calmly replied, "My client did not create the situation. She merely documented it." One cannot sue for defamation when the defamatory statement is the unvarnished truth. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had a reputation for suffering no fools, listened patiently. After hearing the evidence about my father's call to my firm, her expression hardened. She delivered her ruling without even leaving the bench. "This lawsuit is an exercise in astounding avarice and a gross misuse of the court's time," she said, looking directly at Sophie. "There is no such thing as implied familial promise to someone else's property. The claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I find that this suit was filed maliciously. I am awarding full legal fees to the defendant, Ms. Miller. And I would caution you, Mr. Miller," she said, now looking at my father, "that attempting to interfere with someone's employment can have serious legal consequences." It was over. A complete and total victory. Outside, on the courthouse steps, I finally faced the microphones. "I did not want this fight," I said, my voice clear and strong. "But my family left me with no choice but to draw a line. Everything I have earned. This was never about a house. It was about respect. I hope that by speaking up, I've made it a little bit easier for the next person who is told they owe their success to the very people trying to tear them down." In the months that followed the court case, a quiet settled over my life. It wasn't an empty quiet, but a peaceful one. The storm had passed, and what remained was the solid ground I had fought so hard to stand on. The news from Charleston came in sporadic, third-hand trickles. Ethan's divorce from Sophie was finalized. With no prenup and a mountain of legal debt from her failed lawsuit, she walked away with nothing. My parents sold the big house on the Oak Line Street and downsized. Their social circle had evaporated, leaving them with the quiet, empty life they seemed to fear so much. They never tried to contact me again. The silence from them was the greatest gift they had ever given me. My own life, however, began to bloom in unexpected ways. The story had resonated with thousands of people. I received letters and emails from women and men all over the country sharing their own stories of being the responsible one, the family scapegoat, the one whose success was seen not as an achievement but as a resource to be plundered. I realized the platform I had been given was a responsibility. So, I made a change. I kept my high-paying corporate law job, but I converted the third bedroom of my brownstone, the one Sophie had said I didn't need, into a home office. But this office wasn't for my day job. I started a small, pro bono foundation, funded entirely by myself. I called it the Clara Project. Once a month, my legal eagles and I would take on a case, free of charge, for someone trapped in a situation of financial or emotional coercion by their own family. We helped a woman get her name off a predatory loan her brother had tricked her into co-signing. We helped an elderly man stop his children from trying to declare him incompetent to seize his inheritance. We fought for the people who were told to just keep quiet for the sake of family. That year, Thanksgiving came. The thought of a big, traditional family dinner used to fill me with dread. But this year was different. I decided to host. My brownstone was filled with light and warmth and the smell of roasting turkey. There were no blood relatives there. Instead, it was my chosen family. My friends from the Legal Eagles flew in. My colleagues from the firm, the ones who had stood by me, were there with their partners. The table was loud with laughter and stories. There was one special guest. Ethan's father, the man whose three-word text had been the first sign that I wasn't alone. After the divorce, he had reached out, and we had formed an unlikely friendship, bonded by a shared sense of justice. He raised a glass during dinner. "To Clara," he said, his voice warm. "A woman who taught me that the strongest foundations are not built of blood, but of integrity." Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood in my quiet kitchen, looking out the window at the soft glow of the city lights. My home. My sanctuary. It had been threatened, but it had held. It was more than just bricks and mortar, it was a symbol of my freedom. I used to think that family was something you were born into, an obligation you had to carry no matter how heavy it became. But I was wrong. Family is not about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up. Who respects your boundaries. Who celebrates your victories as if they were their own. Family is the people who help you build your fortress, not the ones who try to tear it down. And for the first time in my life, standing there in my own home, surrounded by the echoes of love and laughter, I finally felt like I had one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it resonated with some of you. What does the word family truly mean to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story touched you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Your support means the world.